Hi, friends. I had a conversation recently about internalizing a jazz tune, how to do that, what some effective ways to make that happen. And it mostly came from um, an intermediate player, let's say, who um, really wanted to get past having to rely on sheet music, right? To be able to just internalize this stuff and get to the heart of the matter and be a little bit more free, not a little bit, a lot more free with their approach to improvisation and their interpretation of a tune. So the question came up about how to internalize a tune. So I thought make a video about it and hope to share it with some folks who might find it useful. So particularly targeting this video for people who are in that sort of ballpark who can play some tunes but really are looking to go to the next level and particularly get away from relying on charts and be able to internalize. So that's what this is about. There are really three aspects to this that I think are critical, and we're going to focus on one of them. The third one. The first, though, being melody. You got to learn the melody, right? And how do you do that? Well, you listen to a bunch of versions, you get the sheet music, you read it, you internalize it, you get to the point where you can hum it without playing your instrument. There's not much science there. It's just getting familiar with the thing without being overly repetitious. You can work on internalizing the melody. From that melody, you should also glean what's the form of the tune. Step number two is the form, being able to understand what that is. And if we're talking about jazz standards, there's not a whole lot there. It's probably some flavor of a 32 bar form like AABA, could be rhythm changes, could be a 12 bar blues, could be different. There are of course exceptions, but you want to know what the form of the tune is. So this video is not about that. So learn the melody, learn the form. Finally, learn the chord progression or analyze the harmony. That's what this video is about. So how do you do that? Well, first of all, and let me back up a step. What I'm going to use today for an example is the great Irving Berlin tune called How Deep is the Ocean? So I'll overlay a bunch of images throughout the video, one being the chart that's from the real book. It's also in iPro, but no melody there. So I'll overlay the chart from the real book. And assuming you're an intermediate level player, you'll know things like, what are the seventh chords that are diatonic to the key that we're in. In this case, we're in the key of E flat. So there's some chords that are diatonic to the key of E flat. You should also really understand the function of the chords. And I'm not going to go into great detail about chord function because there's tons of that on YouTube, but just at a super high level, there's tonic function chords, which is really like the home base, right? A feeling of arrival, a destination, a grounding. That's a tonic function chord. There's a dominant function chord, which is introducing tension. It wants to release, right? It's got some tension that is pushing towards resolution. And then there's subdominant, which I like to refer to as a color chord. It's not either tonic nor dominant. It doesn't have the tension that a dominant has. It doesn't have the grounding that a tonic has, but it's somewhere in between. So it's like a color chord. So the most common progression in all of jazz is a 2-5-1, and hopefully you've heard of this. So a 2-5-1 is a subdominant, being the 2 chord, followed by a dominant, being the 5 chord, and finally resolving to the 1 chord. So this idea is very prevalent in all of jazz and super common, especially in Irving Berlin's music. And so understanding your diatonic harmonies, understanding the function of the chords, knowing your secondary dominants. I won't go into great detail on those either because there's tons of stuff on YouTube about that, but I will overlay what are the secondary dominants and their related twos to the diatonic chords in the key that we're in the key of E flat. So again, I'll overlay that stuff so you can see it. I don't typically write this down because I have it internalized, but maybe if you're new to this, you might write it down so that you can refer to it as you're doing this analysis. So the first thing that I do when I'm trying to internalize a chord, particularly the harmonic motion of a chord progression, is to strip it down to its bare essentials. What are what I call the guideposts? What are the important points of arrival? And get rid of everything that is not one of those. So how do you do that? Well, again, going through the tune and identifying the diatonic chords, to identifying the function of those chords and the arrival points through these secondary dominants, you can get sort of the skeleton of it, which I'll overlay at the video. And then you want to check it. So it's really like, if you can think of this exercise as being sort of like a road trip, right? We're going on a road trip where we're going to start in New York, we're going to go to Boston, we're going to go to Philly, we're going to go to Washington, D.C., we're going to go to Chicago. Let's just say that's our road trip. We know our destinations. We know the order of our destinations. What we don't know yet is exactly how we're going to get there. That doesn't matter. That's the creative aspect that we'll fill in later. But we know we're going to arrive at these guideposts at a certain point, at a certain time. This is what I'm sort of referring to by guideposts, is these destinations. So I've written some of that down for this tune, which I'll overlay. And you can check this by playing the tune. So again, I'm assuming at this point you would know the melody or recognize this tune. But what I'm going to do is just play it with its absolute bare essentials, right? It's in the key of E flat, starts with a C minor chord. I'll play the melody and suggest some simple seventh chords with no color at all. The 6th chord, the C minor. Still on C minor all through these first four bars. Go into G minor, our next guidepost. Still in G minor. Now I'm turning to go to E flat. Then go into E flat minor. Again, minor 6th chord. Back to C minor. So same 4 bars as the beginning. Go into G minor. Turn again to E flat. Here's our E flat. With an E flat 7, going to the 4 chord, A flat. To the 4 minor chord, A flat minor, to the 1, to the 5. So simple, right? There's not many chords. It went from C minor to G minor to E flat. We went through a few other changes. We went to the 4 chord to the 4 minor. This is our guidepost. This is the New York, the Boston, the Philly, the Washington, the Chicago points of destination. So now that we have that, we can fill in preceding each of those points. We know where they are, we know when they happen. Just prior to each of those, we'll fill in with a secondary dominant and its related 2 chord for each one of those guideposts. And that I'll overlay so you can take a look at it. So now that we have our secondary dominants, all their purpose is really to turn this into our guideposts. It's like getting off the highway. Okay, we're heading from New York to Boston. We're getting off the highway. We're going to our Boston location. So that secondary dominant is pushing us or turning us into that destination. So that's the overlay that you'll see here. And then finally comparing that to the final version, again, we've got the lead sheet that came from the real book, looking at the difference between those two. There's a few gaps, there's a few things that are out of place, but not too much. If you take a look at the first line of the tune, you'll see the second bar, there's a B diminished seventh chord, followed by an slash chord, E flat slash B flat. So an E flat in second inversion with the B flat and the bass. To me, this is just a way to get a chromatic bass line, right? So starting in bar 1, we've got C as our bass note. In bar 2, B natural. In bar 3, B flat, and then the 2/5 into G minor. So it's a descending chromatic line, but really is insignificant in my mind as far as internalizing the tune, right? It doesn't change anything. It just is a variation that it's like taking the back roads to get from New York to Boston or versus taking the superhighway. So it's just a different way. Those chords are not that critical to the guideposts, but they are critical to the journey that you've decided to go on. So looking through, you'll see some other things similarly, like in bar, I've got the chart down here so I can speak and at the same time as the video is rolling. For example, in bars 7 and 8, we've got G minor, D7 over F sharp, and then a 2/5, the F minor to B flat. That's this chromatic descending technique. Again, it's a variation of a secondary dominant. So that one's fairly insignificant. Skipping down to the bottom where the original chart I had the 4 chord, the A flat major to the 4 minor. In the chart that we've got from the real book, those chords are actually F minor. Well, F minor 7 contains an A flat, right? The notes of an F minor, F, A flat, C, and E flat, contain an A flat triad. So it's a substituting a subdominant chord diatonic to the key for another, right? Rather than the 4 chord, we're using the 2 chord. So that's a very common thing throughout this jazz harmonic language, is substituting the same function chords for each other. So that's why it's important to understand your functions. And then the D flat 7 is kind of a variation of 4 minor. If A flat is our 4 minor chord, but if it were part of a secondary dominant, its 5 would be D flat. So this is a very common, the D flat 7. So just one note about the charts that I'm overlaying. A lot of the secondary dominants, I tried to identify them by this bracket underneath to show that this is a secondary dominant, and the arrow next to it is determining or telling you that it actually goes to the destination that it was intended. Now, not all of them do. Sometimes you want to have some deception in your harmonic progression, and you don't want to always go to a predictable place, but that is one indication of secondary dominant that does resolve where it expects to go. So when we plug in all these color chords, we get something more like this. Okay, so just a way to go through and build a foundation of these guideposts and really internalize those. That's really stripped down version. It's a whole lot less information, and then understand your secondary dominance to be able to turn you to those guideposts. And this is a lot less to remember in a way that you can be free, and especially if you introduce some of the tritone substitutions and their related two chords to, further your path to get to your guideposts. That's a great way to internalize the harmonies. So hope you found this helpful. Check it out.